I'd like to welcome Chaise Levy to the Fifth Direction community this evening. We've kind of been orbiting around each other's fields for a little while now, but had the opportunity to connect via Judith Kate Friedman, Danny Deardoff's partner. And it was just a beautiful experience. We connected in really well with a kind of intimate group, and since that point, kind of connected again, and now find ourselves in conversation. So welcome, brother.
Great. Thank you so much, Asher. I'm happy to be here and just to have been touching into what's going on with the Fifth Direction. So thank you very much for bringing me in this level.
Oh, not at all. And what I like to do to begin is kind of like just for people out there listening, just to orientate themselves a little. Maybe you could let us know kind of where you are in the world geographically, and then maybe also where you are at the moment, kind of mythically, if that's a question I can ask you.
Great. Thank you. Yeah. I currently live in what's called California in the United States, Turtle Island by other names, and in the unceded territory of the Southern Pomo Coast Miwok people, so in Northern California, a town called Petaluma, currently. Yeah. And mythically, what a good question. Um, hmm. I think that one of the big themes that's been coming up, which was interesting to see it as a theme also in the school this month, is or in the on the online, the hanged man, the fool, and this kind of um, sense of uh, the being bound, and also um, the tension between being bound and also being in flight and being ecstatic keeps coming up for me mythically, and connected to that, the big, just the ways in which when you're living, you can likely hear my little one in the background, when you're living in relationality, the ways that relationships are binding us, but also giving us that capacity for the ecstatic and flight and those mythic realms. So that's what comes to me right now where I'm sitting.
Wow, I resonate with that a lot, man. With a little guy at home as well, and there's that kind of there's that polarity, isn't there? And that ability, that mythic ability to kind of dance in the tension of these kind of two opposite kind of themes in a way, isn't it? The idea of feeling constricted, but also at the same time, the whole thing giving you a sense of freedom.
hmm Exactly. Yeah, that generative tension between those things. I
Yeah.
like the idea of, like, you know, that tension creates electricity, and so to like really be with
Mm,
that in my life when I'm feeling those things pulling on each other, whatever it
yeah.
is, whatever the opposites are, and being like, oh, that's electricity, that's power, that's creative dynamism
Mm.
in that's untapped in some way.
Also known as potential,
hmm
which I think is a beautiful thing in terms of the way we use the word potential. That it has an electrical kind of etymology, but we see it as kind of potential in terms of what I can be, um,
mm
which is a beautiful thing. So Chaise, my friend, what are you doing in the world in this kind of mythic sense? Like we talked a little bit about your passion for the stories and for the myths, but how are you expressing that in the world?
Currently, my like most forward facing expression of it has been through a lot of writing. I was going through I did a few years where it was mostly telling in public, kind of hybrid mixture of Zoom and in person. I was lucky enough to live in an intentional community in Oakland called Canticle Farm that my wife's parents started about 12 years ago. And for the last 7 years, my wife and I were living there. And to get to have a place to both tell stories internally and also invite people in to tell stories, and that was a lot kind of in that realm of just tending the heart of community with stories, And recently, it's really been moving into distilling kinds of years of different projects that I took on and ideas that I followed and putting them kind of tracking themes and putting them into writing. So that's been my main um, in the last months. The main way that I've been doing it, I'm writing Substack with the storyteller, ritualist teacher Andreas Kornevall, who's Swedish and but is out in England. And so he and I kind of ping pong back and forth on different ideas of living with story and uh, what is the possibility when we look at stories as provocations, as like ways, questions about how to be in the world with the world. So that's been a lot, and
Yeah.
yeah, and then also my wife and I just finished teaching a course called Watering Our Roots, and Ancestral Healing, Myth, and the Making Holy of Time. And use being in the context of talking to settler descended people in Turtle Island, mostly here, and people whose families at some point um, were either brought in forcefully or bought into the project of whiteness, and talking about what does it mean to connect with story, connect with poetry, connect with the earth as places of connection to resource for these like hard journeys of transformation and co-liberation that we're getting called to in this time. So that's another aspect that's been coming up. That's yeah, that's really enlivening and full of power for me currently.
Wow, there's a bit going on. The course sounds amazing. Very kind of like spirited in terms of the threads that we like to pull at the fifth direction. So I'm sure people listening will be attracted to that. There's no doubt. I mean, when you're telling these stories, I'm really interested in the intentional community. Actually, tell us a little bit more about that. You said your wife's parents founded it. What is it actually in terms of its mission, its purpose?
So yeah, so this community is called Canticle Farm, and it's kind of built on the foundations of a few different things, but the three main pillars, or I would say four really, are Joanna Macy's work that reconnects. My mother-in-law, Ann Simmons Booker, has been closely working in like an apprentice assistant co-equal role with Joanna Macy for I think probably 15 years. She'll watch this and she'll text me, so I'm sure. And then so the work that reconnects Franciscan theology and like the life of Saint Francis, um, and really in this sense of like when Francis was at the end of his life, he wrote the Canticle of Creation, where he called out to all of the things in creation, including death, and named it as his sibling. As this beautiful declaration of interconnectedness. And my wife's parents both grew up well, my wife's mother grew up deeply in radical social justice oriented Catholicism, and my wife's father Terry found it later and was actually training to be a priest when he met my wife's mother. And so this it's woven in their story. The third pillar being Bill Plotkin's Animus Valley Institute and Soul Work. They've both been working with Bill for a long time, and he's a friend of the community. And the fourth is nonviolent communication and restorative justice practices, who both of them are deep practitioners. And so this piece of land that they've been on, they've been there for almost 40 years, and it's always been open, no fences. And then about 12 years ago, they decided to kind of formalize the community, and started slowly over time through collaborations and donations and all of these things. It's now eight houses and a yurt in deep East, in like very urban, deep East Oakland, and doing outward facing programs, food support, connecting with the Seguritate Land Trust, which is a women-run land trust, Chochenyo Ohlone land trust here in California, partnering with them, sort of these amazing hub, and there's a workshop space where we're doing teaching and things like that, and so that's like the main. I was bringing story in there as like how do we connect? How do we think through the mythic lens? What does that do to our work as activists, as people who are showing up for transformation, if we're bringing in these old stories, mostly in my context, telling old stories from the oral tradition.
Wow. Amazing stuff there. I mean, every single pillar you mentioned there is something that I feel, deeply connected to, Joanna Macy's work, certainly Bill Plotkin, NVC, just wonderful stuff you've mentioned there. So this story telling of yours, was that to the community, or were you inviting public to come and listen?
Well, at first, when I was feeling a little shy about it, which I tend to be a little bit of like leaning towards hermit in the laboratory and less towards like doing things public, it was really, my few friends who are interested in, I don't know, the word that's coming to me that sometimes feels hard to use in my position is like decolonizing whiteness and European ancestry. They all got stoked. So it was just like this kind of little crew of people where we would share stories and share our research into different things. So it really started there and sort of built into different people from the wider community coming. And then in my last year living there, kind of culminated in this big public-facing project that I was doing called the Arthurian Year, that was did these kind of same practice with looking into the stories, looking at it from a decolonial lens, looking at it from a healing lens, but particularly in the Arthurian complex of stories, and can talk more about that. But so it kind of grew and grew into the point now where it's all of the storytellings I'm doing are public, are, I'm doing them openly, both online and in person.
Wow. And so is the Arthurian tales and stories, that kind of canon where you're naturally drawn, most connected to? Or you tell me about kind of your word hoard, to use a sort of Beowulf term.
I love it. Thank you. Brings to mind that John O'Donohue poem that I wish I had memorized, where he talks about the word hoard. I wish my bookshelf was here, but it's not. Well, I think it's a complex question. That project came about. I was at my sit spot. I'm kind of deep lover of going to the same place over and over again and paying attention. And so I was doing a sit spot challenge where I was going every day for a full year cycle to the same. I had kind of 2 or 3 different spots because I traveled a little bit during the time, but mostly this same spot under a willow tree in the yard there. And one day was sitting at the spot and just I've heard, in the Irish stories, they talk about a geish, these these kinds of spells that compel us. And so it really appeared to me from in that nexus between me and this place of like, you've been telling a lot of stories, you've been learning stories. I had gone to England and done the summer school with Dr. Martin Shaw at the West County School of Myth, was telling stories from all over, and it came down to me like, there's something about an ecology of stories. Like, what does it mean to like pick up a whole forest of stories, so to speak, and just really dig into that soil and allow yourself to be there. And so this kind of came, and then very swiftly after that, I had Marie-Louise von Franz in my head talking about how the stories that you loved as a little tiny person have something to tell you about the work of your soul in your adult life. And so it just, lightning flash of like, when I was 4. I saw like a cheapo child's production of some Arthurian stories in a mall somewhere in Southern California, and it was just like, you know, just it was the lightning bolt. Suddenly, I was in that, and that was the thing that mattered the most to me. From that, for so long in my life, my young life was so guided by those stories. So it was this sense of returning to 4-year-old self and trying to figure out what the lightning was and what it was trying to say. So I did a full year where the only stories that I told and the only stories I researched were from the greater Arthurian canon. And I ended up doing 13 public storytellings that were recorded, and it's accompanied by a long like theoretical essay on my praxis and what it was like to do the process and who was influencing the way that I was working.
That's fascinating, man. Because as an Australian, kind of we as young children, yeah, most of us, particularly the white children, we get exposed to Arthurian myth, Arthurian tales pretty early on through movies, through books. So it's kind of interesting when you're telling stories where you know that there's a fragment of the DNA of those stories in people's minds before you begin. Rather than kind of telling a story like, let's pull, like, Martin's great at pulling those Siberian tales in, and you're pretty certain that no one in the room has got any concept of what that might look or feel like. To me, there's a big difference, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think that was part of it for me. It was, exactly when you say, like, John Steinbeck wrote this American author wrote in the, the year is escaping me, but wrote a book about Arthur and wrote like, these stories are in us, even if we've never heard them, because of the way they've been pulled into like white Western culture. Maybe those weren't his words, but that's how it translated to me. And for me, that was the curiosity, was like, okay, these stories are, it was, the personal thing, but then culturally, as far as the work, the greater work, is like, these stories are in us. They're in our imaginations. All of these characters, both the heroic and the horrifying, are in there. And so what does it mean to make myself a medium for all of those different voices and all of those different patterns of being, and the wicked and the wonderful, and see what happens as a, like, kind of alchemical process of tracking this landscape of my imagination that is there, whether or not I'm conscious of it, and really, like, when I wrote up my first invitation to the project in December of 2021, it was like, yeah, this is about being with monsters. It's about having good capacity to meet the monsters that are with us, and learn a different move than exiling them and turning them back into Grendels. Like, what's the other move? What's that, like, okay, you're here, join the table. And maybe you transform, and maybe you don't. Maybe you stay monstrous. So
No, I like that.
Yeah.
There's a very Martin Shaw-esque kind of phrase there when he says, look at the story through the eyes of the monster. So even one more step than being with the monster is to actually look at the story through the eyes of the monster, which is kind of, to me, the next move. But it's all very interesting, man, because when I think about the Arthurian canon, you've got stories there which have kind of been told and retold and made into movies and books, like, over the centuries, and so they've changed significantly. Like, what did they actually look like originally? It's a bit like kind of water constantly running over stone. The stone changes, but then you've got stories like Inanna and Gilgamesh, which have only really been uncovered in the last 150 years and thousands of years old. So, but they've remained underground, literally, and completely untouched. So even though they're older, we're kind of looking at them with fresher eyes, and they're closer to source. And I just find that whole mix Really, really interesting. So I'm fascinated that it was the Arthurian tales that you picked up. It's a
Hmm.
huge body of work and a huge undertaking, and I'm sure there were moments when you're like, "Oh my God, what have I got in my hands here?"
Yeah, yeah, it really was massive because um, I had to engage with the whole, as much of the corpus as I could get my hands on, because I didn't choose the stories in advance. Um, so I kind of decided that, okay, every full moon I would tell a story. And so tracking backwards from there, I had to design a research and memorization methodology. And so what I ended up building it around, on the new moon, I would have a meeting with an astrologer friend of mine's, Alexis Andaluki, and she would and we would talk about the transits for the full moon. Okay, what's happening? What is Venus doing? What is Saturn doing? What is Jupiter doing? What is Chiron doing? All of these things, and kind of lay it out as an archetypal map. And then I would leave our meeting and then just go dig into the books between the new moon and the half moon and try to find any chiming of the same pattern in the stories,
Mm,
and
mm,
then memorize it from the half moon, learn it, work with it, take it on the land, do art projects, do whatever my process was between the half moon and the full moon, and then let it go fallow from the full moon to the new moon again, and then do the same process. And so there was never, the whole time, there was one story, the last story I knew I wanted to do, Gowan and the Green Knight, because it was the December full moon, and that's been a really potent story for me in my life. So that was the only one that I picked ahead, and the rest of them was like, learning, digging, researching, finding new things. And one of the most potent and amazing things that happened was on the last story, or the second to last story. I was researching kind of the Arthur Mordred downfall of Camelot arc. Um, and I forgot my book of La Morte d'Arthur at home. And at the time, I was commuting 2 hours to work every day, and I was like, there was no way I could get the book. And so I went on the internet onto archive.org and just looked up, give me a copy of La Morte d'Arthur. And I just clicked the first one, reading it. I'm reading it. I'm like, this is an interesting translation. What's going on here? And so I go back to the front page, look at the author's name, and the author's name is, no, it must be Richard. Sir Richard Strachey, the third Baronet of Sussex. And suddenly my brain starts exploding because that's my direct ancestor.
whoa, no way.
In 1863, wrote a new introduction and retranslated Mallory from the French. So it was just this, like, I had no concept of that. That
How
that
did you
that
know it
was
was an
even,
ancestor, though? Did you you're
well,
aware
I
of that
had
part?
the, yeah, I was
Yeah.
aware of that part.
Mm.
We I grew up pretty estranged from my paternal family, and before my grandfather died in 2021, I had just reconnected with him about a year and a half before, 2 years before that, and he had sent me a huge packet. He was a like consummate genealogist. He loved it, as that's like the one thing that I knew about him. And so he sent me this huge packet of stuff, and I had been scouring through it over the years and kind of tracked this Strachey line, but um, never like looked into that particular person at all.
Mm.
And it was just like, it was that like kind of like explosive, like, oh, so not only did I love this when I was 4, but somewhere in my DNA lineage is someone who also loved these stories. And
Mm.
we have a very different like when I read his introduction, I'm like, we do not understand these stories the same way, but we both loved them.
Well, but you know that yeah, and from a Jungian sense, there's a spirit of the times at play there. So
Hmm.
his translation and understanding of it is probably very much mired in the times that he was living, as
Hmm.
is yours. But maybe, what I would call the other side of that coin, the spirit of the depths, is the same, and that's where that's where the connection is. So
Mhm.
Hence you have, slightly different takes, but
Mhm.
underlying all that, the kind of substrate is the same.
Yeah.
um that's really cool, man. I love, well, no doubt, no surprises then that you're a storyteller, brother. It's literally in your blood.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's really cool. I wanted to touch on your time with Martin Shaw, because he's obviously a character of great interest to us at the Fifth Direction. We follow his work, really closely. But what? Tell me, paint a little picture of what it was like to kind of be in the school there with Martin, and what did you learn, and
Mm.
anything else that you care to mention?
Yeah. Yeah, what a beautiful time to like reflect back. So my wife and I went together to England and Wales and Scotland in 2019. Actually, just after I received that packet from my grandfather, and it was kind of like we were tracking our way through some of the places that showed up as birthplaces for from people in the family tree of my family. And we weren't married yet. We had been dating for about 4 years, and on that trip, we got engaged on the top of Cader Idris, the mountain, where that they say, if you go up there and you spend the night, you'll come back mad, dead, or a poet. I was like, okay, well, I can't spend a night because it was wreathed in fog, which they call, uh, the Gray King. And if the top of it's wreathed in fog, you don't go up there because it's way too dangerous. And so we didn't go up to the top, but it was like, okay, well, we'll get engaged up here, you know. And so incredible experience to have that. And then we actually also got pregnant with our son while on that trip,
Wow.
when we were in Scotland. And so my wife was pregnant with our son while we were at this school with Martin, and that we kind of ended our trip there. And um, I had I had met Martin a couple times before that. He had come out and done some stuff with the Nature Connection program, Weaving Earth, that my wife and I were both in out here in Sonoma County and in Point Reyes in Marin County. And so, had been around him, had been, in the room when he was telling stories. And um, that was really where all this came online for me as like a possibility. I had never heard of a storyteller. I grew up as an actor and a musician. So it was, performance was a part of my repertoire. But this particular thing, maybe I'd seen one person tell a story as a kid, Um, and being at the school was this really deep sense of the magic that's possible when you really carve the time out to sit with like story after story, and to be on the land. That's one of the things that really moved me about his approach during that, I don't know, during that summer school. To In the middle of the week, we spent a full day out on Dartmoor, um, and in with various ritual accoutrements, to like be out there and to be with the place, which was is so meaningful for me because that's just so part of my origin story with storytelling and myth, and what, how does it chime with the land, and which obviously if you're a reader of Martin, like that's so a part of his thing. It
Sure.
makes sense that it be doing that. And my really deep sense, really coming out of it, it was like getting you yeah, punched in the face is the wrong metaphor, but really like just like wave after wave of like he would tell like a 10-minute story and then be like, okay, go tell it. Send us out in small groups, have us go tell it. Okay, come back in, tell another story, go tell it. And it was just this like kind of like, okay, let's just do this. Let's just practice. You had to be bold enough to just try. And I think it was like he did probably 8 or 10 stories in 4 full days, and two of them were massive. And taking away from it just this sense uh, of being bold. Like that year was called Entering the Bardic Secret, And I don't know if he ever told us what the bardic secret is, but the bardic secret that I came up away with was having the willingness to be bold enough to speak from the deep place and to
Mm.
speak from your affinity with more than human beings and to like really give voice to something. Um, and that's been like a hard thing to walk with because I don't feel bold a lot of the time. But it really that I touchstone back onto that kind of takeaway for sure.
I like that. And even listening to Martin talk about his early days, he talks about a lack of boldness in the beginning. So he had to work through that stuff as well. I remember him talking about this idea that he was too scared to come out from behind his drums,
Mm-hmm.
when he was telling stories because they were kind of like they kept him safe.
Mm-hmm.
So, what you were feeling, what I've felt, what perhaps many listening have felt too, and stepping into any endeavor like that, there's you got to be bold, right? So I love the fact that that's what you came away with. It's beautiful. In fact, um, talking about those mountains, and you reminded me immediately of David White, and there's a beautiful line that he often uses, which I hold close to me, which is find the place where you don't know what to say and speak from there.
Mm,
Mm.
that's so beautiful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
isn't it?
that's so beautiful.
Mm.
Mm, mm.
So yeah,
Yeah, I feel
just I'm dancing with all the words that you're sharing here. It's beautiful. Thank you so much. I really feel like you're speaking my language and from a community perspective, our language. So I'm glad you're here, brother. I really am. Um,
mm,
I'm going to take a little backward step now because you mentioned Andreas Kornevall, and
mm.
I'm not going to let that go without kind of diving in there because I think I remember you saying that for a while he was kind of a mentor of yours. Do you want to kind of talk a little bit, add some color to that?
Yeah, well, I love it. It's all constellated around this same trip. So after after being at the summer school, entering the Bardic Secret that year, we were in Chiswick Park in London, staying with a family friend, waiting for our flight home. And one day, just we're pre-child. Oh my God, such an incredible thing. We're just like laying in the shade of a tree for hours, waiting. Just like with nothing to do. I would love to do that again. And and it was an ash tree. Um, which if yeah, if you've engaged with my some of my work, that is like that's a really big character in my realms. And sitting under the shade of this incredible ash tree, and I get this notification on my phone because and it's from Andreas's blog, which I had read like one time months back on something, and it was about the runes and the rune row and Yggdrasil and the ash tree and dragons and it was one of those, to bring Jung in again, those synchronicity moments of here I am. I've just made this pilgrimage here. I just went and studied with Martin. I've been like waiting for this for years and I don't know what's next. And this thing pops up and it's this incredible piece of writing from Andreas that's just really chiming with what's going on for me. And um, I see that he has a course coming up. And actually, no, I see that I've been, searching him up on YouTube, all these things. And he's like, a course had just passed. So there's no opportunity to study with him. And so then it was kind of this holding pattern of like, there's this thing happening with these synchronicities. I want to check out what this guy's doing. And so obviously next course that came up jumped right on. Um, and so sort of from 2019 into 2020 and 2021 or into 2020 was like just taking his online courses every time something came up, and being that kind of like I was in a sort of position with the forest school that I was working at that I could kind of make my own schedule. So the days would change and I would call up the forest school and be like, listen, it's really important to me to get to keep studying. Can I not work on Wednesdays anymore? And kept studying with him. And it came to the point where I had finished the up until the advanced courses and I signed up for the advanced one and no one else signed up. And it was kind of devastating. I was like, oh, he's not going to do it. And my wife kind of goaded me, like, you should just reach out and see. Um, if he'll do something one-on-one with you. And so ever since then, we were meeting one-on-one to dive into all of these different realms of magic and ceremony and ritual and land healing and story. Um, and we've been in this interesting moment where we've moved. I'm just so blessed to feel this sense of like moving from mentor mentee relationship in certain facets of our work into now we're running this publication together. We're designing things together. We're hopefully going to get a year-long course out into the world of how he and I's work together and what they could do for people in the next few months. And so yeah, just so that like welcoming of him into that camaraderie is so just fresh and new and beautiful every time I think about it.
Like a Padawan to kind of apprentice Jedi. It's kind of lovely. I like that. And was that your entree into Norse mythology, or were you kind of dabbling in that earlier?
I was dabbling in Norse mythology earlier, in and out. I knew the characters. I knew some of the stories. I had read Neil Gaiman's like
Yeah.
retelling of the Norse stories when I was working at the forest school, actually, because I was the forest school storyteller, so I would just like throw whatever story books I had on my shelf in my backpack, and we'd go on romps in the woods and track animals. And when everyone got tired, we would just sit down and I would just tell whatever crazy stories I could find, and often probably out of the realm of 5-year-old acceptability, but I got to play with that.
Mm.
So I had some Norse stuff in me as far as the stories go. Um, but that was my real like entree into the depth and the gravity of the like underlying cosmology, energy, magic, um, relation relationship to earth and place and mystery that's really inside those stories.
Mm. Mm.
And it's been a really big, along with the Arthurian, it's been my main study point for the last couple years on working on those kind of nexus points between magic and story and ritual
Mm.
in the Nordic context.
Yeah, because I see a lot of runes and symbols around your work too. So it's obviously deep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. It's that's one of those places where it's like there's the I really through my work with Andreas and also from watching people like Martin, it's really obvious. It's become obvious to me that the role of the magician and the role of the storyteller are very hard to pull away from each other, and so a lot of um, my work has taken on those functions of like how do these magical symbols like the runes and sigil craft that you can see that I'm using in the way that I'm putting my work in the world. Those are symbols and sigils that are calling to people's unconscious to pull them into the imaginal, right?
Mm.
And to open portals to conversation with place and with other beings and with the beings of the story, and they're healing symbols, and there's such an ethic that I'm really working at the edge of like how much do you influence people with your magic and your words, right? Which is something you probably think about as a teller too. It's like
Mm.
how much am I influencing people's morality and people's understanding of the story in the way that I'm telling it? And the sigil craft feels like a part of that same question of like these are powerful uh, magnets for magic,
Mm.
and to use them is an intense thing to invoke, and they do something to us whether or not we believe in magic.
Well, you
Probably
don't
is
have
not
to.
the question.
Yeah, you don't have to believe in it, do you? It's like
Hmm.
um, What did Terence McKenna say? Truth doesn't need your participation.
That's great. I haven't heard that Terence McKenna one.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
awesome.
Well, he actually ended that quote by saying, "But bullshit does,"
Exactly.
which
Wow.
which I really like. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, wow. Well, I guess, leading on from that, where to from here, Chase? What's unfolding for you?
Hmm. Thank you. That's a really good question. Um, hmm. um, some of the things, hmm. Yeah, one of the things that feels really alive right now is um, figuring out, or not figuring out, that's actually not the wrong premise, wandering into and trying to be with um, what it means to be to do storytelling in the way that I do here on this land, and how to like really be coming to that in a way that feels good. I mean, the question that I keep getting asked when I go to workshops and when I get asked to teach is like, why the old stories here now,
Mm,
and why myth here now? Um, because I work with a lot of people who are totally into the idea of the imagination as one of the most powerful tools in the activist toolkit, right? Like dreaming new worlds and doing these things. And these questions about like why the old stories and why and what's the morality and ethic and procedure of using them here on this land. So those are like really things that in this coming year I want to like dive into and have hard and beautiful conversations about in my work. And I think so. That's one lens. I think this year-long course that I'm putting together with Andreas is like really the where to that's coming, to be really honing in on how do you guide people in this kind of globalized world that we're in where we can all be on Zoom. How do you guide people into deeper and deeper relationship with the places that they actually live, with the spirits that actually live alongside them in those places, and with the like the hard skills of beauty of like learning to make things with your hands, learning to track animals, learning to understand bird language, um, and to put those alongside myth so that you know um, so that the the voices that we're speaking with are populated with that whole that whole magic of the
mm,
landscapes that we're from.
mm,
And so that really is coming alive for me, of more of trying to get back to my nature mentoring roots and how to really facilitate that for storytellers.
mm.
And so that's another kind of place. And I'm waiting for the next Geish. I'm waiting for the next story cycle to pick me up. I've had a few different things tingling and tangling me in, and they all haven't really landed yet.
Mm.
Um, I have a couple storytellings and rituals coming up in the Norse world with Odin stories, and so that's kind of alive. But there's some Finn. I think Finn's out there somewhere waiting for me. Finn McCool. So I'm feeling something trembling there. Yeah, those are sort of things coming. Maybe hopefully writing a book this year if I can really have a couple chapters. But yeah.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah, the book thing. It's always there in the back of my mind too. But I think it's got to really grip you, and we almost become insane about it to
Hmm.
make it happen. But yeah, I'm glad you called in Finn McCool, because like I feel like we met through the telling of a Finn McCool story. And so I think whenever we're speaking, brother, I'm going to probably feel his presence. Um,
Hmm.
so that's beautiful that he did come in, because you did say last time we spoke that you were kind of investing a bit in the Fenian cycle. So it's a beautiful it's a beautiful landscape, isn't it?
It's incredible. I have a friend, Sam Edmondson, out here in California, who he recorded. Well, he did a storytelling of the story, but he wrote like 14 songs
Whoa.
inside of it, and did it as this like back and forth between music and actual and telling. He was also a student of Martin's for a while, and so really incredible. And so I think I one of the hesitations I have with the Finn cycle is just like, when I was first introduced to it through his supporting with that process. I played banjo and guitar as part of the backing ground band during this performance, and just how deep of a well it is, and how much poetic fire it asks to be really done in the way that in a certain way.
Mm,
Um, you know, there's incredible bones in that story, and you can do it light and light touches like we heard with Danny the other night, and then
mm,
there's also the other side of that whole Irish story and poetry realm, which are those just like incredible spider webs of language that just like explode and throw you into enchantment.
mm.
So I think I have a little bit of that sense of like, ooh, if I'm gonna do this, I better be sharp. I better come with the dagger between my teeth kind of energy.
Well,
Yeah.
boldness, my friend, right?
Hmm.
Back to that. But you're right, another thing that David White says, the idea was that the greatest poet in Ireland was more important than the king.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's a massive sense of kind of duty and responsibility and honor around that title. So interesting. And I meant to ask you, man, do you use your musical ability in your telling? Are you playing banjo and bringing it all your skills to bear?
Um, with occasion,
Right.
with occasion, yeah, it's one of those things that hmm, I really put it down. I really put down music at a certain point. Yeah, that's a big long arc, and really, was there. Do you know the story, the Earth Gnome or the Gnome? It's a Grimm's Brothers story. So in the way that Martin tells it, and also in the Grimm, there's
Yeah.
he's in the underworld, and he
Mm,
picks up the silver flute the first time, and it's like, now is not the time for music. So the first time I saw Martin tell a story, he's up there in the full tilt of this story, and the whole just gets quiet for a second, and it's like, now is not the time for music. And at the time, I was living in the back of a recording studio. I was working on an album. I was busking on the street corner every single day. Like, it was like a real thing, and it was like, whoosh,
yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
whoa.
Yeah.
And I just stopped. I quit the band I was in. I moved out of the recording studio. I stopped playing, because that was the message that night for me.
Mm,
And when I told that story again the year before last, before the earthing and stuff, and there was that sense when I got to that point in the story, it didn't have the same. I could feel that old thing, but it didn't have the same hook. And when he then picks the flute up again, and the gnomes come and pull him up by his hair, had a lot more charge.
yeah.
And so I've been slowly like limping my way back to the guitar, and to the banjo, and the other host of instruments that I picked up in my early music life.
So in staying in the story, you don't quite feel like you've reached that moment where the time is right.
Mm-hmm.
All in the
Yeah,
gnomes. Is
it's
that how it
that.
feels?
It's all. Yeah, it just feels. I'm learning how to accept my limp on the guitar, because I used to be able to really, really dance, you know, like really play. And because I was playing for 8 hours, I was like playing all the time. It was all I did. And now the way I play has a serious limp in it.
Mm,
And it's hard sometimes for me to accept, um, that it's okay that I don't
mm,
play at the caliber that I know that my hands used to be able to. Um, and uh, so I think that that's where I am in that story. It's like, it's I'm accepting the music back, but there's still a resistance. And so maybe the gnomes are pulling my hair, and I'm still trying to play, but the gnomes are pulling my hair. It hurts a little bit, um, and I'm coming out. I'm coming out of the underworld, and I have something different to share than I used to. Um, yeah, that's what I
Wow.
would. That's where I would go.
I'm glad I asked that question, man. A lot of beauty just came out, I felt then. So thank you for sharing that. The idea of learning to accept your limp. I think there's always so much gold in around that theme. Brings me back to Danny actually, and how we met. There's a man who completely embraced that, virtually wrote a book about it.
Yeah, an incredible book.
Yeah, really. If anyone's listening, The Other Within is quite the book. And just on that, I felt a sense of joy when Judith Kate was saying she might be turning that into a course. Let's not put any pressure on her, but just the fact that that might be some kind of steps in that direction lights me up.
Yeah, that's actually how I came to Judith Kate, because I had this idea for a book club, and instead of just starting it, I emailed her and was like, "Hey, I know that you're stewarding this book. I have this idea for a book club. I want to start it with some of the guys from the School of Mythopoetics. Would that work for you?" And her response back was like, "Let's get to know each other first."
Oh, isn't that
you
beautiful?
know and it just was that moment of like, I was so glad for all of my years of people of like being in intergenerational community and being like, okay, there is a reason why we ask our elders questions
Mm,
first, and
mm,
particularly when they're stewarding something,
yeah.
and so um, it just opened the doorway to us to actually just build a relationship. So it's been something we've been talking about as well in our relationship, about how to do book clubs and courses and all of these things. And so we're really looking forward to, I'm really looking forward to when it all allows for that to happen, because I think it will be really beautiful and generative to tangle with that in community, tangle with that book in community.
Oh, I agree. It's so full of there's some potency in there that you rarely feel. It's amazing. So I'm hoping that happens, and I'll be all over it if it does. Like I'd love to join in some way, shape, or form. That'd be beautiful. Well, Chase, look, it's been an absolute privilege to have a chat with you, my friend. And I'd love to kind of extend the invitation for you to come and do something in our space. So, that's something we can talk about, away from this recorded conversation, but to have you come in and tell whatever story arrives, we'd love to have you do that one day.
I would be an honor and a privilege to get to share space with you all and just to feel some of the magic of what you've been cultivating. It seems like from what I've seen and sounds like from our conversations that it's really deep. And so I would be humbled. I would come in humbly just to, you know, really drink from your well and give what I've got.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, brother. And one day, perhaps, maybe stepping on this soil might be a thing as well.
I would be overjoyed to come down and or come up whatever way the plane goes, and be with you all, and be with you and meet you, and see some of my other friends who are scattered around the continent,
Yeah.
from other lives. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, let's throw it out there and see what unfolds. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Asher. Thanks for having me.